Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope I find you all well. I'm sorry if there's a lag or things seem out of sync. I don't know, we've been having issues. Obviously we live in a village, so we don't have like 5G towers and stuff like that, so our internet is pretty basic. So I apologise for any distortions in the videos. I don't really know how best to tackle that at the moment, so we are just trying to push through, so I do apologise. I am here with the next video of Return of the Gods. First of all, I just want to welcome any new subscribers and anyone that's watching the video that's not subscribed. I truly really appreciate you watching it, and if you do want to join us, then we would love to have you. I'm trying to create a nice community on here as much as that can be even possible on the internet these days. Let me just mute that. So yes, I am going to pre-record quite a few videos and then set them as premieres, because I am super busy next week because it's my 40th on Tuesday. Praise the Lord, and Lord being willing I get there, because who knows. So yeah, so we've got a lot of plans next week, so I didn't want to leave the channel without anything. And yeah, I know I don't normally wear my glasses on here either, but my daughter picked them and I've just picked them up today, and I'm trying to wear them all day so I can actually get used to having them on, because I've got to drive tomorrow. So thank you so much for joining me, guys. I do really appreciate it. So let's go ahead and jump into Return of the Gods. We are actually nearing the end of this book now, so I mean, it has been really good. I do want to pick up some other of his books because I like his style of preaching, because I've actually been listening to some of his preaching online. And I think what he says about history, and now obviously that's biblical. You know, there's nothing new under the sun. History just repeats itself. So go back and check out the other ones. All the books that I've read on here are all in playlists. I'm so sorry this video is distorted because it's driving me mad. But I'm sorry, guys. Just going to have to bear with it the best way we can. And I pray to the Lord that it levels out at some stage. I don't even know why it's doing it. But, so, let's go through and figure this out. So we've got the purple garland and the double-edged axe. Could the role that women played in the processions of the goddess reveal another side of the mystery? The women of the goddess. Women not only took part in the goddess's parades, but also displayed her power to blur, break, and switch the lines of gender, but from the other side. As the parading men assumed traditionally female roles, the parading women assumed traditionally male roles. It is never explicitly spoken, but the idea of lesbianism is always implicit. If under Ishtar's power, women could take on the roles and functions of men, then taken to its ultimate conclusion, that would include the role and function of husband or lover. It was implicit in Ishtar's androgyny in nature, temperament, and role. She was as masculine as she was feminine. She transformed herself from female to male and back again. This again would imply the altering of her desire. So though it was never overt, lesbianism was always implicit in the goddess's crossing of gender and sexuality. It was there as well among Stonewall's patrons, though making up a small component, women were among them. It was there the night it all began, when a lesbian in handcuffs incited the uprising against the police, and it was there afterward in the gay pride parades where lesbians made up a large part of the participants. Sign of the two Ishtars. But could there be more that joins the modern revival of lesbianism to the ancient goddess? Among the most basic modern representations of lesbianism is that of two crosses topped with two large circles intertwined with each other. Two symbols of the female joined to each other. How did the female symbol originate? Its first known appearance is that in that context is found in the works of the Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus in the 18th century. He used it to represent female flowers. Linnaeus took the symbol from the Greeks, who used it to represent the metal copper, which was associated with the planet Venus. The planet was associated with the goddess Venus. Venus was the Roman incarnation of the Greek Aphrodite, and Aphrodite the Greek incarnation of Ishtar. Thus, the sign that, to this day, represents the female, known as the Venus symbol, ultimately goes back to Ishtar, and thus the symbol for lesbianism, based on the symbol of Venus, likewise go back to the goddess. The sign is, in effect, that of two Venuses, two goddesses, two Ishtars intertwined with each other. Sappho and the terrible enchantress. The modern revival of lesbianism takes inspiration from the Greek poet Sappho. Sappho led a theasos, a community of young women for which she served as teacher. Her sexuality is, to this day, a matter of debate, but her writings appear to indicate a romantic or erotic attraction to women. The patron deity protecting Sapphos's community was the goddess Aphrodite, the Greek incarnation of Ishtar. Sappho worshipped the goddess and wrote of being intimately acquainted with her. Her poetry is filled with elements from the goddess's court rites and worship. Only one of Sappho's poems still exists in its entirety. It is a prayer to Aphrodite, whom she addresses as the terrible enchantress. Prominent in Ishtar's court were prayers to the goddess entreating her to use her magic to alter the affections of others. That, in effect, was Sapphos's prayer, but the object of her affection is a woman. In the poem, the goddess appears to Sappho and assures her that she will cause the women to love her. Sappho was born on the Greek island of Lesbos. From the name of that island comes the word lesbian. Thus, behind the word lesbian is the island of Lesbos. Behind Lesbos is Sappho. Behind Sappho is Aphrodite, and behind Aphrodite is Ishtar. It all goes back to Ishtar. The violet-crowned goddess. It is from Sappho and the island of Lesbos, as well as the colours purple and violet, and from this lavender have become associated with lesbianism. Her poetry is adorned with mentions of purple or violet. It is from Sappho as well that the violet became the symbolic flower of lesbianism. She writes more than once of a woman crowned with a garland of violets. Even in this is the goddess Aphrodite was the violet-crowned goddess. Thus even the colours of the flower of lesbianism went back to ancient goddess, the incarnation of Ishtar. The double-edged axe. In the 1970s, a symbol was adopted by the emerging lesbian movement. It was the most prominent of the movement's first symbols. In 1999, the symbol was incorporated into a flag of purple that was used as a banner to represent the movement and lesbianism itself. The symbol was an axe with two blades, a double-edged axe, also known as labries, or labries, whatever. Why was it chosen to be the sign of lesbianism? It goes back to ancient times. On the island of Crete, the double-edged axe was a sacred symbol of the ancient Minoan religion. The symbol was associated with women. In the days of the Roman Empire, the double-edged axe was associated with a mythological warrior woman known as the Amazons. The double-edged axe as a symbol of women independent of men and taking on the nature and place of men, was thus chosen as a modern symbol of lesbianism. The ancient axe became part of gay pride parades displayed on banners carried by those who saw themselves as heirs to the ancient Amazons. Weapon of the priestess. But the double-edged axe and its connection to the altering of gender goes back beyond the people of Greece and Crete. It found in the writings of ancient Mesopotamia in the city of Sumer. It appears in a hymn to the goddess. It's from an inscription we have already seen, the describing of the goddess's parades, the male prostitutes and men parading as women and male and female transvestites, the cross-gendered, the sound of the drums and the coloured fabrics. It says this: the people of Sumer parade before you. The young men who carry hoops sing to you. The carrying of hoops was associated with women. The young men are feminized, but it goes on. The maidens and coifed priestesses walk before you. They carry the sword. The young women and priestesses, on the other hand, are carrying objects associated with men. They are the goddess's women who, following in her footsteps, take the roles of men. As the goddess brandishes a sword in battle, so do the women of her parade. But according to the account, the women brandish another object as well. They are carrying the double-edged axe, hymns, banners, and spirits. So it is in an ancient hymn to the goddess that the double-edged axe makes its appearance, and the context of its appearance is that of women taking on the functions of men, and beyond that they take up an axe in the gender-crossing parade of the goddess. And now, in the modern world, the same object from Ishtar's possessions was revived to serve as a symbol of lesbianism. Women taking on the roles and functions of men. So, the same weapon wielded by women in the ancient world to bend the lines of gender and sexuality now became the symbol of women in the modern world, bending the lines of gender and sexuality. And as gender-crossing women lifted up the double-edged axe as they marched in the goddess's ancient gender-bending parades, now they would lift up banners emblazoned with the image of the very same axe as they marched in the modern gender-crossing parades of their revival. The women had no idea they were replaying an ancient mystery, but the spirits have their own way. We saw in Stonewall how the mythic functions of the Babylonian calendar converged to determine the exact timing of the uprising, but the mystery of timing would not end on Christopher Street. It would spread into the mainstream culture until the world's yearly cycle was imprinted by it. Yet few in the modern world could have imagined that the calendar in which they lived their lives had been changed by a mystery that went back to ancient Mesopotamia, and that was connected to mythology and the workings of the gods. To uncover the mystery, we must go back to pagan celebrations of ancient Phoenicia and Latin writings of the early church father known as Saint Jerome. So that's the end of that chapter, guys. I'm just seeing how long the next one is. It's actually not that big, but a few notes on previous chapter. Strange thing is, obviously everybody knows on here that I was in a civil partnership with a woman. I've not hidden that fact. It is what it was. I was lost in life. But hey, I've had that experience, so therefore I can talk on it. And the strange thing is, after our civil partnership, we went on honeymoon and we actually went to Crete. So how strange is that? I did not know that the island of Crete in Greece actually had any ties to this kind of thing. And yet I just stepped into that life. And then obviously as a lesbian couple, we went to Crete, knowing the history. You see how the spiritual side of things work without you even realizing. And that, as I was reading that, I was just like, wow. And I've read this book, but I never made that connection before. So I just found that astonishing. And I know there might be women out there that say that being a lesbian is not about taking on the man's role. But I have been in those circles, and you know, there always seems to be a more feminine one and a more butch one. And I know it may sound so stereotypical, and I'm not trying to insult anyone. I'm just speaking about what I've witnessed. And even when it comes to, how can I say this and remain and clean with what I'm saying, because I don't want to be vulgar, because I hate it. But even when the signs of the things that are done in the bedroom, they will imitate a man and their genitals with things that they buy from shops, if you know what I'm getting at. I'm trying to keep this so it's not cringy and disgusting. So if you are not bothered, if it's about women and feminism, and why do those things? You know, so it's true what's being said. From what I've witnessed, from my experience, this is all I can think of to say from my view and my point of view, is those things are true. That is what happens. Probably not for everybody, but certainly in the circles that I moved in. So yeah. Side note, guys. Obviously, if it aligns with something I've been through or whatever, then I will speak my testimony of that situation. And I just thought I would add that in. Of course, I'm not, in no way glorifying the life that I led before, but I can't go back and change that. I can't. But I'm going to use those experiences and situations for good going forward and for the Lord. So, this is why I always say, it's hard to regret the things you've been through. I do in the terms of going against the Lord, of course. But the things that I've learned and the lessons that I can carry through life with me to help other people or to speak on these subjects are invaluable. So if that's all I can take from it, then that's all I'll take from it. But we'll go ahead and do the other chapter, and then hopefully this video will be about just over 20 minutes. Right, Junium. There was one time of the year especially indwelled by the goddess, the month of her possession. Ishtar played a part in her holy days and festivals, but it was this one time of year that her mythology, her passions, her frustration and anguish, her desires and longings, her rituals, and her possessions of multitudes saturated Mesopotamian culture for an entire month. It was during those days that her spirit seemed everywhere. It was then that the people of Mesopotamia not only worshipped her, but in their passions became as her. They cried out for her lover Tammuz, as it were her crying out through them. They yearned as it was her yearning in them. They moved in procession as if it were her moving in procession. So the prophet Ezekiel was given a vision in which he saw the women of Israel weeping as if it were Ishtar weeping for Tammuz. The people became her channels. The goddess of possession possessed them. It was at that time of year that her mythology exerted an amplified power to infiltrate daily life. They were the days when, according to her mythology, she and Tammuz were separated. He was in the underworld and the land of the dead, and she was in the land of the living, seeking to be reunited. Rituals, observances, festivals, and processions dedicated to the goddess and the object of her desire took place throughout the Middle East. One could hardly escape it. During those days, the air was especially filled with her presence. The 29 days. What would happen if the goddess returned to the modern world? Would she again mark out and lay claim to a similar time of year? Would she again create rituals to be performed during that time? Observances to be kept, festivals to be celebrated, and processions to be followed? And would her spirit again especially indwell those days? The answer is yes. That's exactly what she would do. Upon her return to Western civilization, the goddess set out to mark and lay claim to a space of time every year as her own, a time that her spirit could especially inhabit, as she was the goddess of pride. The time would be crowned with the name Pride. The time of the goddess and the object of her passions lasted approximately 29 days, so 1 month of the ancient Middle Eastern calendar was especially given for the procession of the goddess, her lover, and her mythology. Rites, festivals, and processions took place from the month's opening to this last day. So the mystery would ordain that the spirit of the goddess would again seek to lay claim to a similar space of time in modern times. 1 month each year on the calendar of the civilization she was now speaking to possess. And so it happened in exact accordance with the ancient mystery. The sacred month. In the wake of Stonewall, gay activists established marches and parades to celebrate homosexuality, then an entire week, Gay Pride Week. But in ancient times, the goddess laid claim to an entire month of observances and parades, and so Gay Pride Week was then transformed into Gay Pride Month. To increase its acceptability and further popularise it, its name would later be shortened to Pride Month. So, as in ancient times, the spirit of the goddess was given an entire month to indwell and possess. And as in ancient times, that month would be known for its processions and parades, observances, rituals, and increase of her power. It was a strange phenomenon, the celebrating of that which once occupied the forbidden corners of society had come to permeate and dominate American and Western culture. America and other nations of the West were now devoting an entire month to honour, praise, and celebrate a form of sexuality that a little while earlier had been nearly universally viewed as a form of immorality. Now it was being treated as sacred. A strange veneration. Equally strange, nations were placing the celebration of this mode of sexuality above their own holidays. Nations would typically devote a day to the celebration of their birth or independence, but they're now devoting almost 30 times that amount of time in order to celebrate a particular form of sexuality. And it was happening all over the world. Nations with little in common were now celebrating the same holiday, giving homage, veneration, and praise all to the same thing, and to that which they had only a little while earlier deemed to be sin. What could account for such a strange and dramatic transformation? It was more than natural. It was the work of the gods. In all of history, there had never been a phenomenon quite like it, and yet Pride Month was the resurrection of the ancient month of the goddess's possession. So now again, as in ancient times, an entire month was given to the indwelling of a spirit that blurred and broke the lines of gender, that feminised men and masculised women, that turned the one into the other and caused them to be paraded in city streets. Finding Tammuz. When in the ancient year did the days of the goddess and her lover fall? They fell in summer, and it was in the ancient month of Tammuz, since it was based on the lunar calendar. Its timing with regard to Western Gregorian calendar would, of course, oscillate. Tammuz can begin in June or July, but 70% of the time it begins in June. Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown's commentary on the whole Bible, published in 1871, says this of the month and of its ancient celebrations. An annual feast was celebrated to him in June, hence called Tammuz in the Jewish calendar. The Bible commentator Joseph Benson, who lived in the 18th and early 19th century, wrote this of the month and its worship. Tammuz, which also is used for the 10th month reckoning from the autumnal equinox, that is, the month of June, and Tammuz as the object of worship expresses the solar light in its perfection as in the summer solstice. Benson brings out the link between the month of Tammuz and the summer solstice. There's only one month in which the summer solstice takes place each year, the month of June. Junium. Saint Jerome, who lived in the Roman Empire at the time of its conversion from paganism to Christianity, was most famous for producing the Vulgate, the Latin translation of the Bible. But he was also known for writing biblical commentaries. One of these was a book of Ezekiel. It was that book that contained the description of the Hebrew women in the spirit of Ishtar weeping for Tammuz. In commenting on the passage, Jerome drew from his knowledge of the observances, rituals, and practices that were still being performed at the time of his writing. His original words in Latin read, I'm not even about to read Latin, guys, but I will show you. Right, this is the Latin. So if any of you can read Latin, go ahead. Adonis is called Tammuz both in Hebrew and Syria. Then he writes of the god's death and the time of its occurrence. In the month of June is killed. So Jerome identifies the time of Tammuz's death as the Mense Junio, a month of June. He continues, there's more Latin, guys, but I'm going to read it in English. They call this month of June by the same name and keep an annual festival in his honour. Thus, according to Jerome and other observers of his day, the month of Tammuz was equivalent to the most equivalent to Junium Mensem, this month of June. Tammuz corresponds with Junium and Junium with Tammuz. June is also identified as the month in which the annual festival takes place. Thus, the identification of Tammuz with June, and thus June as the month of the annual celebration linked to the goddess and her mythology, are ancient ones going back to the Romans, those who gave the month of June its name. The repossession of June. So, if the goddess returned, what would happen to the month of her possession? The calendar of the modern world was based not on that of ancient Mesopotamia or Middle East, but on that of Rome. We might then expect that, of all months, she would choose the month of summer solstice. We might expect that she would choose that month, the month that, more than any other, inaugurated the days of Tammuz, her lover, Junium Mensem, the month of June. She would take special possession of it. She would turn June into the time of her channeling. And since June had long been known as the time of weddings, the joining of man and woman, its modern transformation would be all the more dramatic. And thus June became Pride Month, and Pride Month became June. As America and the West turned away from God and Christianity, the ancient month returned to the goddess. And as in ancient times, the summer solstice and the days it inaugurated marked the time of the goddess's processions and parades. The summer liturgies. The festival of the summer month, of which Jerome and others wrote, involved rituals of lamentation and mourning over Tammuz's descent. We know that women were involved in those rituals, but it was not women alone. The Asinu, the Kalu, and the Gala, Ishtar's cross-gendered priesthood, the men who dressed as women, were given a central part in the rituals. They would lead the lamentations by chanting and wailing in female dialect. So now, in the revived processions of June, men would again take on the attributes of women. After nearly 2,000 years, the month that Jerome called Junium had revived its pagan function as the vessel for the annual festival. June would again serve the instrument of the goddess's power, the time when her spirit would especially possess the culture in which she dwelled. Festival of Inversion. The month of Tammuz, or Junium, centered on the mythology of Ishtar and her lover, but it was not about their union. It was about their separation. It was about the obstruction of passion and desire. So the modern observances of June as the commemoration of the Stonewall riots were born of the same thing, frustration and anger over the obstruction of desire. The parades themselves were aimed at tearing down all walls of resistance and to remove the hindrances separating desire from its fulfillment. Beyond this was strange coming together of the goddess's observances. The timing of Pride Month harkened back to the days when Tammuz and Ishtar were separated, and thus the theme of separation. The separation of man from woman and woman from man. It was thus the perfect time for celebration of homosexuality, lesbianism, and other alternate sexualities. But the revelry of Pride Month harkened back to the goddess's celebratory festivals. In Pride Month, the two came together. The modern observance was not a lamentation over the separation of male and female, but a celebration. It was now a festival that celebrated the separation. A month-long holiday that rejoiced in men separated from women and women separated from men. In this, the rites of the goddess converged into a festival of inversion. We're nearly there, guys. The licentious rites of midsummer. And yet the ancient rites and festivals observed in the month of Tammuz's separation were also noted for their sexual licentiousness. One commentator writes this of the festival as practiced in ancient Phoenicia or Lebanon. The women of Gebel used to repair to this temple of Aphrodite, Ishtar, in midsummer to celebrate the death of Adonis or Tammuz, and there arose in connection with his celebration those licentious rites. The writer places the licentious rites as midsummer. The summer solstice in June, the 2nd century Syrian writer Lucian gives his own account of the rites and observances of June. I saw too at Byblos a large temple sacred to the Biblian Aphrodite, Ishtar. This is the scene of the secret rites of Adonis, which is Tammuz. He goes on to describe how the women would shave their heads in homage to the slain god of Adonis, Tammuz, and those who refuse to do so offer their bodies to strangers as prostitutes and give proceeds to the goddess as a sacrifice. The early church historian Eusebius writes of the same temple of Venus, Aphrodite, Ishtar, in Phoenicia on which the rites and processions of June were centered. The votaries of impurity destroyed their bodies with effeminacy. Here, men undeserving of the name forgot the dignity of their sex. Here too, unlawful commerce of women and adulterous intercourse with other horrible and infamous practices. The Temple of Venus. The ending of the Midsummer Festival and processions of the goddess is implicit in the writings of early church historians Eusebius and Socrates. Scholasticus both record the clearing away of the shrine of Venus, Aphrodite Ishtar in Lebanon by the Emperor Constantine. He likewise demolished the temple of Venus at Aphaka on Mount Libanus and abolished the infamous deeds which were there celebrated. The temple or shrine of Venus at Al-Fakar. I don't know. On Mount Libanus served as the source of the festivals of which St. Jerome wrote and identified with June. So, the festivals of June, or Tammuz, came to an end. Thus, one of the most overlooked signs of the conversion of Western civilization to Christianity was the ending of month-long celebrations of midsummer with its June parades and gender-crossing spectacles. And thus the return of the month-long celebration of midsummer, the revival of June parades and the reappearance of gender-crossing spectacles was not an accident. It was a sign of the de-Christianization of Western civilization and its subsequent re-paganization. The Temple of Venus was ultimately the Temple of Ishtar. The ending of the June processions was linked to its destruction, and its destruction was linked to the exile of the goddess and the gods. So, if the hallowing of June and the annual festival, the parades and processions of the cross-gendered should return, it would be a sure sign not only of de-Christianization and re-paganization, but of that which accompanies both, the return of the goddess and the return of the gods. The return of Junium. For Christians of the first centuries, such as Eusebius, the rites of June and their associated practices could only be seen as celebrations of immorality. For Christians of the 20th and 21st centuries, the revived rites of June and their related practices would be seen in the same way. They were not alone. Many others in ancient and modern times would view it similarly. For those not swept up in its fervour, June's transformation was a mystery. The month-long celebration seemed almost religious in nature, and it was. It was the return of an ancient religious observance. The sacred procession of June was not a strange phenomenon to pagan culture. The sight of parades in which men dressed as women and women as men and the distinctions of gender were blurred was, to paganize, a familiar one. Their return was the natural outcome of a repaganization of Western civilization. What had begun with the turning away from God had now given birth to the rites and processions of pagan summer festival. The parades had vanished with the gods. Their disappearance was a sign that the gods had departed. The return of the parades was thus the sign of the opposite. The gods had returned. And the rising magnitude of the summer celebration was a sign of the rising power of the gods and the intensifying hold they were exerting on America and the world. The departure from God had allowed the pagan mystery month to rise from the dead. June was reverting to its pre-Christian state. Junium was returning. Month of apostasy. In the Bible, the month of Tammuz is known for something else. It was in Tammuz that the nation of Israel first turned away from God and to the realm of gods and idols, to the golden calf. It was June that often began that Hebrew month, and now, again, June would mark the turning away of another nation and another civilization from God and to the gods. It was the month of apostasy, that of a nation and that of a civilization. What happened to June is another reminder that whenever a nation or civilization, or for that matter a life, turns away from God, it will never remain neutral. It will never stay empty. It will become indwelled by something else, something other than God. It will become inhabited by the gods. Those who had taken part in the removal of prayer and the word from American public life could not have imagined what it would lead to. But the empty house could not stay empty. A civilization had turned away from God, its worship of God. Now the sacraments of a different worship had come in. The door was left open. The house was found empty. The spirits came in. The gods returned with them their holy days. It is possible that behind a sign that now appears in everything from corporate logos, video games and children's cartoons to t-shirts, coffee mugs, cereal boxes and flagpoles of American embassies, a sign lifted up by people of every background, by leaders and nations, lies in an ancient deity. And it is possible that this sign that now covers the world actually serves as an instrument of that deity to accomplishing of purposes unknown to those who bear it. And it's all I have to say on that is, before I came on and quite a lot lately I've just been hearing, I thank God that he didn't give me what I wanted for so many times. So many times. I was thinking of all the things that I've prayed for and I didn't get. And I thank you, Lord, for knowing that it's best to give me what I need and not what I want. Praise the Lord. Thank you, my Lord Jesus Christ. He always knows what's best. Always. It might, in your, our thoughts are not like God's thoughts. Our ways aren't his ways. So in our mind, sometimes the things and how, the Lord deals with things in our life just seem so, not confusing, because God's not the author of confusion, but odd at times. But trust the process, because it all makes sense in the end. Honestly, even in the times of despair. But I'm not going to go waffling on too much because it's half an hour and I'm trying to keep these videos short enough where you guys can just listen to them in one go. But I pray the Lord speaks to your spirit as I was reading that, and you can actually see how it resonates and how it's forming in today's world. And, we all know if you have an empty vessel and you don't fill it with the Lord, and, it tells you in the Bible, and it was left swept in and inaudible empty, that spirit will come back with 7 more worse than itself and dwell there. And that's what's happening with the countries and the world that remove God and prayer. And now these unclean spirits move in with 7-fold worse spirits than it already had before. So thank you so much for watching, guys. I really do appreciate it. And I will be back with you all soon in the next video.